October 15, 1996.
It's been a year since Louis Farrakhan led hundreds of thousands of black men to Washington.
We got to resolve today that we're going back home to do something about what's going on.
Then Farrakhan puzzled many by embarking on a world tour that included stops in Iraq, Libya, and Iran.
Keep the revolution alive!
It's wrong for another American to go and cavort with dictators who have inflicted terrorism upon the United States.
The controversy was a reminder that Farrakhan's agenda is a volatile mixture of black self-reliance and militancy.
He will not expand his base because he has undermined all the progress we made with the Million Man March.
Tonight, Louis Farrakhan.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Say what you will, think what you will about Louis Farrakhan, the Million Man March, which took place here in Washington 1 year ago tomorrow, would not have happened without him. He conceived it, he was the driving force behind it. Farrakhan would later claim that 2 million men attended. The park police eventually and somewhat grudgingly conceded 600,000 or 700,000. But for all the pettiness that surrounded the count, it was indisputably a massive and powerful demonstration. The central theme of Mr. Farrakhan's message was equally strong.
We must accept the responsibility that God has put upon us, not only to be good husbands and fathers and builders of our community, but God is now calling upon the despised and the rejected to become the cornerstone and the builders of a new world.
And indeed, that part of Farrakhan's message was echoed in church sermons around the country. And there is clear evidence that there was an increase in black men returning to their communities, and for the first time, many of them paying child support, while others joined mentoring programs for inner-city youth. But after disappearing for a while from public view, there are some reports which suggest that Farrakhan was depressed over the lack of credit that he received for organizing the march. Last January, Minister Farrakhan embarked on a world tour. He visited South Africa and Nigeria, Sudan and Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Libya. That turned out to be as controversial as anything Farrakhan has done or said before, and he was just as unrepentant.
When the Million Man March was over, the first call that I got internationally was from Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi's a revolutionary. He's my friend. He's my brother. And I will never deny him because you don't like him.
What complicated the visit to Libya in particular was the offer of a $1 billion gift from Colonel Gaddafi to the Nation of Islam. The U.S. government made it immediately clear that such a gift from the leader of what Washington regards as an outlaw nation, a sponsor of international terrorism, would be illegal. Louis Farrakhan is clearly a complicated man, capable of generating enormous enthusiasm with his appeal for social responsibility among black men, but just as inclined to incendiary and sometimes hateful attacks on Jewish Americans.
You are wicked deceivers of the American people. You have sucked their blood. You are not real Jews, those of you that are not real Jews. You are the synagogue of Satan. And you have wrapped your tentacles around the U.S. government. And you are deceiving and sending this nation to hell.
Periodically, Louis Farrakhan seems to anticipate a violent end, as in this reference to his visit to South Africa.
They treated me like a king. Yeah, just remember when they crucified Jesus, that's what they put on the cross. Jesus, King of the Jews. Don't you forget it.
because you're about to see your scripture fulfilled.
A lot to talk about, so let's begin. Louis Farrakhan joins me from our studios in New York. Talk about that last reference where you seem to be, and I stress the seem, drawing an analogy, a parallel between yourself and Jesus?
Well, any person who seeks change for his people finds themselves walking in the path of Jesus. Jesus, to me, is the true revolutionary of the world. And those of us who seek good for our people, generally, we are evil spoken of, lied on, and ultimately brought thorns on their head, meaning that the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding that they have, that they use for the benefit of their people, turns on them and brings them great pain and suffering.
When you talk about the fulfillment of Scripture, though, as you did in that soundbite that we just heard, do you sometimes think you're going to be assassinated or you're going to be killed?
I don't think that Almighty God will permit that of me. However, what a Muslim says in his prayers, my sacrifice, my life and my death is all for God. I am born and I must die at some time. I only pray that it will be in the service of truth and in the service of the cause of the liberation of our people.
You can, at times, as you were just now, sound not only like such a reasonable man, but a loving, a kind, and forgiving man, which is not at all consistent with that soundbite we just heard from you, talking about some Jews. Which Jews are you talking about, and why do you insist on singling them out?
Well, you know, all the Jewish persons that I've heard sometimes talking about us, they say there's good and bad in every race of people. We live with that. And if that is true for us, it is also true for the Jewish people, a people who have had as many prophets and teachers from God as the Jewish people. They have the greatest wisdom, and upon them really is the greatest responsibility. And those that live up to that responsibility by following the laws, statutes, and commandments of God are really divine in their actions. But those who reject those standards but yet have that wisdom and go against those statutes and those commandments are no longer really the Jews. They are those who claim to be that, but by their disobedience to the laws, statutes, and commandments of God are not that.
Mr. Farrakhan, you could make the same observation about Baptists or Methodists
and Muslims
or Muslims or Catholics, yes, and yet you never do.
Yes, I do.
You do about people in general.
In that same speech that you quoted, I mentioned Muslims and I mentioned Christians, those of us who claim these lofty ideals, but our practice is far below what we claim. And when our practice falls so far below what we profess, we literally destroy the efficacy of what we profess. And this is why people today are opting out of religion and out of politics, because politicians and religious leaders seem to preach what no one wants to practice.
You have just mentioned politics. You called at one point for the establishment among African Americans, not of a third party, we have to be very careful, but of a, was it a third force?
A third political force,
yes.
A third
political force. What are you talking about?
I'm talking about the kind of thing that we see today. Should it be Dole? Should it be Clinton? Should it be Perot? We are really tired of saying my white man is better than your white man. We need an agenda that is in the interest of the majority of our people, and an agenda that a person can sign on to as the basis for giving them our vote. We must vote for what is in our self-interest, not for the personality and the kindness and the suavity and the intelligence of that person if that person does not have our agenda in mind.
Is there such a man or woman on the horizon at the moment?
Well, to be very honest, we crafted a national agenda which we feel is universal in scope, that black people can stand on it, but also Hispanics, Asians, Arabs, and Native Americans, as well as poor and vulnerable whites. We sent this national agenda to all three parties and their standard bearers, and we have not heard any response from them.
But just very quickly, because we have to take a break in a moment, is there any individual out there, a politician now or perhaps someone who might yet become a politician, who fits the qualifications that you have?
To be very honest, Mr. Koppel, we would have to see how that politician responds to an agenda, not kindness, because in the White House, we can have very kind persons, affable persons, but there are powers and forces that the person in the White House has to deal with to make this nation safe and to make the world safe.
But the short answer at the moment is no?
No.
Okay. We're going to take a short break, and we'll continue our conversation with Minister Farrakhan after this. With us from New York. I'd like to talk for a minute with you about the billion-dollar gift that was offered. Well, was it in fact a gift? Did Colonel Gaddafi offer it as a gift or as a loan?
No, after the Million Man March, the day after, we received a call from Muammar Gaddafi. He was so excited at what he saw, he offered to place the wealth of the nation of Libya behind the nation of Islam and our goals and objectives of the empowerment of our people and Muslims in America. And later that was referred to as $1 billion, which in his September 1st speech last year, he mentioned that he would give $100 million to $1 billion to see the empowerment of blacks and Muslims in America. And so we sought a license from the U.S. Treasury to receive this $1 billion that we may use it for the uplift of our people, the empowerment of our people, and the empowerment of Muslims in America.
Let us set aside for a moment the fact that the U.S. government won't let you accept the money. Why do you think he's being so good to you? I mean, you're an experienced politician, an experienced leader. You've been around the track a couple of times. Nobody gives away $100 million to $1 billion just to be a nice guy.
Well, you know, we're in the season of atonement and reconciliation. And according to what we have read in the history, that some Arabs were involved in the slave trade, some Jews were involved in the slave trade, Gentile European nations were involved in the slave trade, and Africans were involved in the slave trade. And our worst destruction came after we were brought to America and totally destroyed as a people. So in this atonement process, the same people that helped to take us down ought to be a party to the redemption of this people in an act of expiation for past misconduct.
With all due respect, I've never known Muammar Gaddafi to engage in an act of expiation of any kind toward anybody. And let me just remind you of what Mao once said, my enemy's enemy is my friend. Has it not occurred to you that because Libya regards the United States with as much hostility as the United States regards Libya, that he might look upon you as a means to undo the United States, and therefore he might be willing to give you an extraordinary sum of money?
If the United States can be undone by truth, the United States should never have been in existence in the first place. Mr. Gaddafi could not enlist me to do evil against this country, but what he could do is back me in redeeming and strengthening and uplifting a people that have fallen in the mud and are not lifted out of that condition after 100 years up from slavery. The government of America, instead of criticizing Gaddafi, should say, we will join him, and if he gives $1 billion, we'll give $1 billion. After all, Mr. Koppel, we get $438 billion out of the American economy, less than 0.1% of which rotates in our own community one time. With $1 billion from Gaddafi and whatever our own government would give, perhaps we could inspire the growth of entrepreneurs in America that would attract at least 10% of that $430 billion back into our own communities, that we could rebuild the wasted cities.
I don't doubt for one moment that you could put that $1 billion to good use. But I ask you again about Muammar Gaddafi's motives in doing this. Perhaps I'm not as charitable in analyzing his motives as you are, but he is a man who clearly has some enmity toward the United States.
No, he does not have enmity toward the people of the United States. He has enmity toward the policies of the United States government. And let us be very clear, Mr. Koppel, the American people do not really know what the foreign policy objectives of the United States government is, how our government operates in Africa, in the Middle East, and in countries. We have 400 major corporations that contribute to the Congress. According to what I read last week, they have contributed up to now over $400 million to Congress, and by the end of the year, these 400 companies will contribute at least $1 billion to Congress to make laws that favor them. And most of these corporations operate in countries throughout the world and are interested in who those leaders are. And if a leader arises that does not lead for the greed and wealth of American corporations or British corporations, then American intelligence, British intelligence will move on that leader, and that's why the CIA has been guilty of assassinations all over the country and then has the nerve to call somebody else a terrorist.
Mr. Farrakhan, if you're pumping for campaign reform, there are a lot of people out there that want to join you, but we've got to take a short break. More with Minister Farrakhan in a moment. Louis Farrakhan, as I said at the top of this program, Minister Farrakhan, I think a lot of people were favorably impressed both by the Million Man March and by your role in bringing it to fruition. Many of those same people, however, also believe that you squandered your opportunity after the Million Man March, that you had an opportunity to build on that base and you didn't do it.
I still think that opportunity is present, Mr. Koppel. What I did was try to link black people in America with our brothers and sisters in Africa, and as a Muslim, to tie the Nation of Islam to the Muslim world. That, by the grace of God, we did. Tomorrow at the United Nations, we are calling for a World's Day of Atonement, and we expect our brothers and sisters and people of goodwill in New York City and the surrounding areas to come and hear this call for all of the nations of the earth and all of us to get to the business of atonement, reconciliation, and responsibility. All of us need to atone, and all of us need to reconcile where we have differences.
There are a number of African-American leaders who endured some criticism in order to attend the Million Man March last year. They won't be there this time.
Well, that does not mean that the Million Man March or the Day of Atonement won't be successful because Leader A, Leader B, or Leader C has something else to do. And I don't think that this should be used as a point of division among us. People are not there for whatever their reasons are. But I pray that the people of New York will turn out and you will see an outpouring again of our people, because we believe that only when we can reconcile with God and get clear with Him that He will empower us to unify and change the realities under which we live.
Mr. Farrakhan, frequently what you say makes eminently good sense and is extremely lucid, and then I'm going to read you this quote because we don't have it on videotape. You told congregants just before the Million Man March at a Washington church about the Mother Wheel, a heavily armed spaceship the size of a city which will rain destruction upon white America but save those who embrace the Nation of Islam. It sounds like gibberish, but maybe you can explain it.
Well, sir, you can ask President Jimmy Carter if it's gibberish. You can ask some of the astronauts who went up and saw it if it's gibberish. On the front page of the Washington Post, several years ago, a Japanese pilot was flying across the Bering Straits, and he saw something in his radar that looked like two large aircraft carriers joined together in terms of size. And an aircraft carrier is 440 yards long. Two of them together would be a half a mile by a half a mile. This is that wheel that was spoken of in Ezekiel that has become a reality. It's over the heads of us in North America. And soon you shall see these wheels over the major cities of America. It is above top secret by the United States government. And if it were gibberish, they made an awful lot of money, Mr. Koppel, on that movie called Independence Day, was about that which you call gibberish, and it flooded the theaters.
Yes, it did. It was fiction, and just for the record, what President Carter spoke about was a UFO. There was no specificity about the kind of thing that you're talking about. He was asked whether he believed in UFOs, and he said yes.
And he said he saw it, and he said when he became president, he would open up that information, which he never did.
That's correct.
But that information is leaking out now to the American people.
Minister Farrakhan, it's always too short when I have you on the program and too infrequent. I hope you'll come again soon. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, sir.
And we'll be back in a moment.